Let's go! Once upon a time in a country where not every crime made it to court and not every decision made it to the news, where truth could slip quietly through the cracks and whole scandals were swept under the rug, as if forgetting them would make them go away. There were stories that were too uncomfortable to confront, too complex to explain, or simply too inconvenient for the right people at the wrong time. And just like in the old fairy tales, they were dwarfs, but they weren't minors. They were magistrates, prosecutors, men in robes and titles who didn't whistle while they worked. They plotted behind closed doors, and instead of 7, they were 8. And there was Snow White, she wasn't asleep. She was in power, smiling, press conferences while forest burned behind her. But just because a story was buried doesn't mean it disappeared. And sometimes all it takes is looking back to finally see what was always there. Welcome to the first episode of our new series, Once Upon a Time. A project dedicated to uncovering the forgotten stories of corruption, state capture, and institutional betrayal that have shaped the present we live in. Even if we rarely speak about them today, the series is not about nostalgia or dramatization, it's about memory and accountability. These are gonna be all real cases, some buried, some ignored, others too dangerous or inconvenient to confront when they happened. But every single one reveals something crucial about how power operates when left unheld. And once upon a time, we'll revisit scandals that were deliberately pushed out of sight, expose the mechanism that allowed them to happen, and examine the long shadows they still cast over our society. Through documents, testimonies, and hard facts, we will tell the stories that were meant to disappear, not to relive the past, but to understand the damage they did to our present. And today we'll begin with one of the most shocking examples of institutional corruption in Bulgaria's recent history, a case involving high-level prosecutors, millions in stolen assets, forged legal procedures, and gold-filled car trunk.
Wow.
All centered around a small restaurant in Sofia, ironically named the Eight Dwarfs. Before we talk about the people involved in our fairy tale, we need to understand the machinery behind it. Because this case didn't happen in isolation, it followed the tested method used in many times before. It's a system designed to extract wealth, crush resistance, and protect those in power. We're gonna call it the dirty machine.
Oh, hello there. Didn't quite see you, was just traveling through channels, slipped into this one by accident. Or maybe, not by accident. Whatever. If you're wondering who I am, my name's Yanev. Yes, that one. Former politician, exiled, a guy who tried to fix Bulgaria and got crushed by the machine instead. Used, weaponized, then thrown out like a spent bullet. Anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about how the game actually works. When a business in Bulgaria makes net profit over 1 million leva, you're no longer just a businessman. You're a target. Suddenly, you're under a spotlight. They start watching, not by chance, by design. And when your turnover goes over 10 million leva, then it's real fun. You're under constant surveillance. Tax authorities, police, regulators, they don't just knock, they break in, legally. They monitor, audit, pressure. It's not personal, it's procedural. It's the dirty machine. That's all you need to know. I'll leave you with Alex now. He'll explain what I mean. Bye. And don't forget.
From this day forth, you put your faith in me.
It usually begins when business becomes successful, highly profitable, influential, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. It catches the attention of political elite, not by accident, but because many of them work with internal models that identify where the money is, who owns what, and who might be vulnerable. Once a target is selected, the first step is almost always an offer. It doesn't come in writing, it comes through intermediaries, notaries, former prosecutors, trusted fixers. They deliver a message. You're doing well, we can protect you, all we ask is a small share. It's framed as tax, unofficial but very real, a protection fee. Pay it and you can keep running your business without interference. If the business owner agrees, they're absorbed into the system. They keep operating under quiet surveillance, hoping it's enough. But if the answer is no, the second phase begins. This is when the media machine is activated. Suddenly, news sites and television hosts begin attacking the target. False stories appear, accusations fly, the business owner is portrayed as corrupt, criminal, even foreign-funded. It's not journalism, it's a pressure tactic designed to isolate, discredit, and soften public sympathy. Next comes the legal strike. A fabricated case is launched, the charges are based on twisted facts, anonymous tips, or outright fiction. The file lands in the hands of prosecutors and judges who already know what the outcome should be. The point isn't to prove guilt, the point is to neutralize the target fast. And it doesn't stop there. Once the target is weakened, arrested, defamed, or financially broken, a second offer is made. But now the price is higher. For example, if the first demand was 10%, now you will be able to buy your partial freedom giving for 40% or even 60% depending on the messenger and his mood. Sometimes they don't want to share, they want the whole business. You're facing jail time, frozen accounts, and total collapse. You're far more likely to say yes, but if you still refuse, the process drags on through years of court battles, house arrests, asset seizures, and psychological warfare. In the best case scenario, after years of fighting, you win, you clear your name, maybe even take Bulgaria to court in Strasbourg and win compensation. But by then, your business is gone, your reputation destroyed, your life permanently altered. And people behind it all, they remain untouched. Because the system is built in a way to protect its architects, only the front-facing operatives, the notaries, the messengers, the low-level fixers ever risk exposure. The rest keep their distance and their power. This is pretty much the logic of the machine. It's neither random nor improvised. It's systematic, and the Eight Dwarfs scandal is one of the clearest examples of how this system operates, not in theory but in practice, with real victims, real damage, and no real accountability. But before we continue with the first story, there's one more key piece of puzzle we need to talk about. Because the machine doesn't work alone. It needs an institutional weapon, one specifically designed to bypass normal legal protections and to fast-track fabricated charges straight to punishment. And the weapon was the specialized prosecutor's office. Let me show you how it worked. In that case, we gotta go a little bit back in time. In 1947, under the influence of Soviet law, Bulgaria established the position of the Prosecutor General, mirroring the Soviet Union's Prosecutor General. This role was endowed with extensive powers overseeing the legality of activities across all institutions, including the judiciary. The system was designed to ensure strict adherence to the Communist Party directives, effectively placing the prosecutor's office above the other branches of government. The centralized model persisted even after the fall of communism. In 1991, Bulgarian constitution maintained the Prosecutor General's significant authority, allowing for hierarchical structure where lower-level prosecutors were subordinate to higher ones, culminating in the Prosecutor General's office. Critics have linked these structures to the Russian Stalinist model, highlighting its potential to abuse due to concentration of power and lack of effective checks and balances. The European Court of Rights has criticized this system for failing to provide adequate safeguards against abuses of power by Prosecutor General. In recent years, the Bulgarian parliament introduced a mechanism intended to allow investigations into the Prosecutor General, a legal reform aimed at reducing the near-total immunity the position had long enjoyed. This marked a step away from the era of unchecked power where former chief prosecutors like Ivan Tatarchev could famously declare,
"Only God is above me."
However, while the mechanism technically exists, its effectiveness remains limited. In practice, it has not led to significant results, and the whole structure of unaccountability remains largely intact. However, the Prosecutor General is no longer completely untouchable. In reality, the system still lacks the independence, transparency, and enforcement necessary to genuinely hold the office accountable. This is one of the reasons why corruption levels in Bulgaria have remained persistently high despite formal legal reforms. In Bulgaria's entire democratic history, not a single Prosecutor General has served without controversy. Every one of them has faced serious doubts, often seen as placed to protect political elites and shield organized crime, not to fight it. Instead of reducing corruption, the office has repeatedly covered politicians, magistrates, and criminals who should have been behind bars. This is exactly why even today, when serious crimes happen, murders, major roads accidents, or even when Russia bombs Bulgarian military warehouses or conducts military exercises in the Black Sea, the prosecutor's office remains silent. It rarely takes action on its own, it sleeps through national scandals, but the moment a politician becomes inconvenient or civic activist starts asking questions that make the government uncomfortable, suddenly the prosecution wakes up. Within 24 hours, there are arrests, revoked immunities, and people dragged into custody. In those cases, the system moves with the speed of light. When it protects power, it works. When it should protect public, it disappears. On paper, the Specialized Prosecution Office mission seemed clear: to take on organized crime, high-level corruption, and serious economic offenses. But in practice, it became one of the most feared and controversial tools in Bulgaria's justice system. Instead of delivering justice, it was frequently used to settle political scores, target business rivals, and pressure inconvenient voices into silence. It operates like a closed loop, with prosecutors, judges, and investigators all part of the same tight control structure. Evidence standards were low, arrests were swift, and outcomes were far too often predetermined. This wasn't just speculation. Over the years, the institution faced criticism from lawyers, human rights organizations, and even the European Commission. They pointed a pattern that the office wasn't functioning as a neutral legal authority, but as a tool to legitimize pressure campaigns and corporate raids. The institution was actively defended by the most powerful names in Bulgaria's political and judicial elite, the very same people accused of benefiting from the system abuse. It's no coincidence. Eventually, in 2022, the office was officially shut down, but by that point, its mission had already been reserved, and its damage already done. To many, it wasn't an institution that protected society. It was a legal weapon, one that gave a corruption system the illusion of authority and the cover of law. The Specialized Prosecutor's Office was not just an institution, it was a mechanism, a pressure valve in the dirty machine. It turned suspicion into guilt, rumor into indictment, and made it completely legal to punish someone long before they ever stood trial. So pretty much this is the legal environment in which the Eight Dwarfs scandal took shape. And now that we've seen the system, let's meet the people who used it and the victims who paid the price. The channel Alex Brings Order exists because of people like you. If you wish to continue my legacy and help me create even better videos, the Super Thanks option lets you support me on this journey. It means a lot to me and truly helps with future videos. Thanks.
You should be grateful that you're still alive. Everything you've ever owned is no longer yours. The fat guy and the man with the cat needed their share. So whatever crumbs might remain from your gold, we'd keep it for ourselves.
Don't worry, my friend. We'll make sure to protect your business, whatever the cost may be.
The truth will eventually prevail. Don't worry, my friend. I've helped many people here. All I need from you is to trust me now. The rest will be settled. The rest will be settled. The rest will be settled. The rest will be settled.
Let me tell you a story of a man who built elevators for a living only to be thrown into the depths of political and criminal underworld that makes hell look like a tax office. His name is Iliya Zlatanov, once the proud owner of Osемte, the biggest elevator company in Bulgaria. We're talking about the annual turnover north of 20 million leva, a respected businessman by any measure. And yet by 2020 he was in exile, his company stolen, his son thrown in jail, his entire fortune looted and scattered. As for his enemies, they rolled up in G-classes, smiled for cameras, and handed out justice like it was a happy hour cocktail. So how does something like this happen in a so-called EU democracy? Simple. In Bulgaria, the justice system isn't a system, it's a syndicate. And the prosecutor's office, according to Ilia Zlatanov, it operates like a specialized criminal group.
Собственикът новия беше онзи ден тук заедно с специализираната прокуратура, за да си описва нещата.
Не специализирана прокуратура, е специализирана престъпна група.
It all began in 2017. What started as a bitter family conflict rapidly escalated into a brutal corporate war. Behind the curtains were not just family, drama and succession issues, but operational businesses, high-end vehicles, Swiss bank accounts and betrayal from within. Ilia's own wife and children became advertisers. On paper, it looked like a private dispute. In reality, it evolved into a state-assisted corporate heist. Trying to keep it clean, Iliya took the proper path. He filed official complaints. He even begged the Bulgarian tax authority not to step up and audit his business. Their response? A casual shrug. Sorry, not our job.
Когато помолих 2017 НАП да направят ревизия там, защото аз нося отговорност солидарна. Знаех вече за ДДС-то ме е страх, защото там ДДС-то се хваща. От НАП ми отговориха, че нямат ресурс да направят ревизия. Може да се постави.
When every institution closes its eyes and ears, that's when you realize the only option left is to call someone whose name never appears on official paperwork. On June 25, 2019, Ilia's son Yavor and his business partner showed up at the Dupnitsa factory with a police escort and a private bailiff. They waved around documents proving that the company had been transferred not to Iliya, not to his children, but to a firm called K Correction, registered in Kyustendil. The factory was locked, machines powered off, Iliya was shut out. Everything he'd built collapsed in a heartbeat. And just as despair was settling in, a neighbor leaned in and whispered a name. That kind of name you only hear in hushed tones, a fixer, someone who makes problems disappear for the right price, someone with deep connections and no moral breaks. This is when the fairy tale turns into a folklore. Not 7 dwarves, 8. And there's Snow White, just a country bleeding from its justice system. Welcome to the restaurant known as the Eight Dwarfs. Not just a place to eat, but a negotiation chamber soaked in a cigarette smoke and criminal enterprise. Inside a dimly lit back room, Iliya found himself across the table from a man infamous in both the underworld and the upper judiciary, Petyu Petrov. Better known as the Euro, former head of the Sofia's investigation department, Petrov was too controversial for court, already disbarred but somehow still practicing law. Disciplinary hearings buried, reputation irrelevant, connections untouchable. Iliya poured out the entire story, the betrayal by his family, the suspicious asset transfers, the hijacking of his life's work. Petrov, unshaken, simply leaned back and said, The truth will prevail. Don't worry, my friend. I've helped many people here. And eventually, help he did. That type of help that arrives with sirens and seals in less than 2 weeks. The Bulgarian prosecution charged 6 people with extortion and money laundering. Zlatanov's wife and children saw their vaults empty, 35 kilograms of gold, 565,000 euros gone, seized in the same name of justice. But justice like this doesn't come for free. Just one day before the official gold raid, Iliya was ushered into the tidy little office, handpicked, of course, by Petyu Petrov himself. It was there, surrounded by calm faces and boiling pressure, that he was presented with a promissory note worth nearly 3 million leva. The beneficiary? A woman named Lyubena Pavlova, none other than the wife of the Euro. The deadline to repay it? November 30th, 2019. No negotiations, no discussion, just sign. So who exactly is Lyubena Pavlova? Not just a spouse in the background, she wore many hats. Self-proclaimed civic activist, sharp-tongued businesswoman, and proud co-pilot in Petrov's invisible empire. The two of them cruised around in Range Rovers, flanked by Delta Guard bodyguards and escorted by actual police officers as if there were some royal Balkan family, only without a crown or the shame. In front of Petrov's office, a jeep would often sit parked, guarded by uniformed police officers. Yes, real state cops playing the role of a private security inside an office where the cameras rolled elsewhere. Iliya was assured that his money would be returned from the Swiss bank account, except 50% of it would stay with Petrov's law firm. And here's the part where it even gets more absurd. A contract was given, but no copy was given to Iliya. Not a single page, and the lawyer supposedly representing his interest, a woman named Desislava Kotseva, carefully chosen from Petrov's own trusted circle. By this point, it was obvious Iliya Zlatanov hadn't hired a lawyer, he had hired a hostage negotiator, and he was the hostage. Kotseva looked him in the eye and told him they had found all the gold, but if he wanted to see it again, he had to agree to split it 50-50. Iliya, desperate and worn out, agreed. Better a bird in the hand, he said, than a stork in the sky. But just as he began to hope for resolution, Petrov became mysteriously unreachable. Kotseva claimed he was busy, allegedly helping decide who the next chief prosecutor of Bulgaria would be. Yes, and that's how deep it went. Apparently, in modern-day Bulgaria, you can pick the chief prosecutor from a whiskey-soaked table inside a shady dinner. The judiciary future of an EU member state decided in the small smoky corners of a restaurant called the Eight Dwarfs. Within 6 days, 6 people were arrested, over 5 million leva in gold and cash were discovered, but this wasn't the climax. This was the curtain rising on Ilia's real extortion, because now he already owed nearly 3 million leva, not to the state, not to a bank, but to the wife of Bulgaria's most infamous prosecutor fixer, and it was all documented in a promissory note signed, sealed, and almost buried. And here's the Mafia twist. They didn't even try to hide behind offshore firms and shell companies. They did it all under their real names. This was an organized crime hiding in the shadows. It was walking daylight handing out business cards. Soon after, Iliya was taken out on a surreal trip to a government hospital, but not for treatment. He was escorted there by tough-looking men just in case he drops dead. He was promised a formal contract and a payment advance. Instead, he was ambushed with a fully pre-filled notary deal already half signed. He met a notary, Vesela Ivcheva, who insisted that everything was perfectly legal. Because of course, what could be more normal than selling multi-million euro company inside a hospital office surrounded by armed guards? But wait, the contract transferring shares wasn't even signed by the actual buyer. It was signed by Lubena Pavlova himself. The supposed buyer, a mysterious figure named Christian Christoph. And after that she vanished, gone, nowhere to be found. Just imagine the absurdity. You're forced to sell your company, and somewhere in the middle of signing the deal the buyer disappears, and the person who signed the paperwork wasn't even the buyer. It was a pure heist dressed up as a business deal. Iliya described himself perfectly. He was the camel in the desert surrounded by wolves.
За най-интересното е, че аз продавам дялове на Кристиян Христов, а протокола го подписва Любена Петрова. Обаче аз подписах протокола, къде е Любена, там Любена си го фейкал. И така и този протокол не е подписан, представям. Така че аз разбрах вече, че съм измамената Камила.
The very restaurant where this all were orchestrated, the Eight Dwarfs, remains under tight Delta Guard security to this day, as if the truth might show up one day and demand a table for more. Then came the matter of the gold, 4 vaults raided, over 4 million leva in treasure confiscated, and suddenly the prosecution claimed that Iliya bought it from an Austrian dealer through invoices, in his own name, and the only problem? Iliya hadn't even been to Vienna in the last 6 years.
Прокуратурата го намира златото в 4 трезора. Единия на бившата ми съпруга в трезор, другите на Явор трезори. На 17-18 юли. И вземат го. В септември ми казват, че излизат някакви документи. И викам, добре, какво ще стане? И ми вика, сега ще ги представим на Франтишек да им ще ги одобрили. След това лично Франтишек ми извика зимата да подпиша при него протокол, че злато е намерено. И между недомовки разбрах, че има фактури на мое име, че съм купил златото от австрийски дилър на злато. Аз във Вена съм ходил преди 6 години.
The man presiding over the circus, Dmitry František Petrov, head of the specialized prosecution at the time, and when asked for comment, he offered none. Pure classic. Meanwhile, Iliya was being shuttled around Sofia like cargo. He couldn't use his phone, couldn't make calls, every movement was controlled. He was placed in an armored SUV with Lubena herself, who casually told him that the gold was already handled. They drove straight to the prosecution office, no security checks, no identification needed. Inside, Iliya signed a document confirming the gold, except, surprise, 52 coins were missing and 1 extra was mysteriously present. When he asked about the discrepancy, they simply replied that it would all be settled with the Bulgarian National Bank. Lubena then left with the boxes, and that was the last time he ever heard from her. They didn't even bother with subtlety. They forgot invoices, faked ownership, showed him protocols already signed. And eventually they ghosted him like a scam artist after payday. As the dust settled from a fake notary deal, the new names started crawling out the shadows. A fresh lawyer appeared, Magdalena Monchovska, another legal puppet quietly handpicked by Petya the Euro. She slid into the story as if on cue, ready to play her part in what was no longer just corruption, but performance art in a broad daylight. And then came the final insult. Iliya was called to a last meeting. Present were Desislava Kotseva, Dmitry the karate kicker Spasov, and Lubena Pavlova. They told him, without hesitation, without shame, that he would get nothing. Not a cent, not a document, not a single ounce of gold. Because as they said here, the fat guy and the man with the cap needed their share, and whatever crumbs might remain, maybe, just maybe, they'd keep for themselves. The meeting ended met with another death threat, same tone, same message, everything that was yours is now ours, be grateful that you're still alive. And then came the warning. If he didn't show up again to sign more documents between April 13th and April 15th, they take even his personal belongings. And if he dared to resist, you know what comes next. So what do you do when every cop ignores your calls, your guards are spies, your gold is gone, and your lawyers work for the Mafia? So you run. And that's exactly what Iliya did. He took the last plane on Amsterdam on April 12th, one day before the ultimatum. He escaped just one breath ahead of becoming Bulgaria's next banished man. Back in Bulgaria, his companies had been sold to K-Correction for a laughable price, 3,000 leva, but the deal had legal holes. The registration failed. On paper, Iliya was still the owner. In reality, he couldn't set foot on his own property. Because the real owners now were the guys with guns. Delta Guard, Bulgaria's private muscle for hire, blocked his entrance, factory filled with his name, his sweat, his investment, now locked behind men in black. And the mysterious buyer, Christian Christoph, nowhere to be found. This wasn't a business deal gone wrong, this wasn't a family inheritance dispute, this was a coordinated, multi-layered, high-level extortion carried out with the elegance of gangsters wearing ties and the backing of the state. How does 4 million leva worth of gold confiscated during a criminal case disappeared out the back door of the prosecutor's office? Easy. You sign the right invoices, you shake hands over a dirty dinner table, and then you split the loot 50-50 with Petru the Euro. And yes, you heard that right. According to Iliya Zlatanov, the confiscated gold never reached the Bulgarian National Bank. It was unlocked, sealed, or protected as evidence. It went right back into the circulation, not in the justice system, but in the real system. The one ran out of the restaurant called the Eight Dwarfs.
Според разказа на Илия Златанов, намерено от прокуратурата злато за 4 милиона лева е върнато на него, въпреки че е иззето от сина му, и изчезва на паркинга на специализираната прокуратура през март тази година. Това се е случило с помощта на фактури на името на Златанов, които никога не е виждал, и с уговорката от джуджетата да се дели на половина с 5 еврото. Още по-любопитна обаче е историята с връщането на парите в брой, иззети при претърсвания на банкови сейфове. Отново с подпис на прокурор от специализираната прокуратура.
На вас някой давал ли ви 500 000 евро в квито от прокуратурата? Предполагам, не. И на мене не беше никой ми давал, обаче ето оказа се, че може и че трябва.
If you thought handing back gold like it was a lost wallet was insane, wait until you hear what they did with 500,000 euros in cash. That money wasn't stolen, it wasn't embezzled, it was gifted. Yes, gifted to a man with absolutely no connection to the case, the man Dmitry Lambovsky. Lambovsky wasn't some random name. He was a businessman, a former member of parliament, and someone who'd been close enough to Bulgaria's inner circle to know exactly how the sausage gets made. In March 2020, he was invited to a friendly gathering at that one place where friendly conversations came with threats, the Eight Dwarfs. There, he met 3 men, each like a character from a rejected Netflix crime pilot, Petru Petrov the fixer, Bojo, a former Mafia bodyguard, and Ivan, a guy whose entire CV was just muscles. They had one simple message for Lambovsky. You have legal income, we need you to sign for some money. No explanation, just a vague hint that František, the head of the specialized prosecution, and Ivan Geshev, the chief prosecutor, were already informed. In plain terms, sign the papers or bad things might start happening. And Lambovsky, having already lived through Bulgaria's version of cause and effect, it took the hint. 5 years earlier, a grenade had been planted under his car right after he reported money laundering to Boyko Borisov. Back then, he got state protection, but now the same state protection was being used to squeeze him. They handed him a document to sign saying that he was gifted 650,000 euros to someone he had never met in his life, Iliya Zlatanov. Yes, Iliya's son, the original victim, on March 16th at the specialized prosecution building on Cherkovna Street, 550,000 euros seized from Iliya's ex-wife were handed over in a plastic envelope. Lambovsky signed, but the cash didn't go to him. Instead, a lawyer walked out, slid into a black S-Class and drove off. And you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to guess who was waiting in that Mercedes. It was Lyubena Pavlova, wife of the Euro, manager of various shady shell companies, the woman who had been dancing in and out this entire heist like a mafia ballerina. And the prosecutor who signed off the whole circus, Kirill Pechinov, a man with a straight face and a twisted job, the public voice of the specialized prosecution, and the guy trusted with Bulgaria's biggest cases. And now the whole system started to make sense. If you have gold, it gets lost. If you have cash, it gets relocated. If you complain, you get arrested, and if you survive, you disappear quietly. Lambovsky didn't exaggerate when he said, if this happened to another EU country, people would literally burn the place down. And he's right, but in Bulgaria, the chief prosecutor demanded an apology not from the mafia, not from the prosecutors, but from the journalists who exposed this whole system. The very people called looting the justice system are being promoted, and everyone else, they call it misunderstanding, a case under review, a coincidence. A key figure in this mess and supposed buyer of Iliya's stolen empire is a 24-year-old boxer named Cristian Christoph, no business degree, no engineering experience, no clue how elevators even work, but somehow now managing €2 million factory surrounded by Delta Guard muscle, operating with more police presence than an actual crime scene. And you think this was some kind of rags to riches startup fairy tale? A young man wakes up and poof, is a proud owner of Bulgaria's largest elevator business. Except he never bought it. He just signed a contract in a hospital room while the rightful owners were under heavy pressure from pay to the euro. Enter Iliya Zlatanova, Ilia's daughter and sister of Yavor. She testified that Delta Guard didn't just secure the factory, they stormed it like a tactical unit. They locked out her entire family, machines worth millions were left behind, raw materials, inventory, all of it held hostage. And then, a surprise guest. Dmitry Spasov, nicknamed Mitko the Karate Guy, the muscle behind Delta Guard, he appeared on the scene like a bodyguard in a gangster film and blocked Iliya Zlatanov from even stepping inside his own property. What followed was a surreal exchange, one that could have been lifted straight from the Mafia-themed sitcom if it wasn't so terrifyingly real. Back at the infamous Eight Dwarfs restaurant, yes, still open for business and still protected by Delta Guard security, SUVs lined up like it was a gangster parade day, and surrounding it, it was all quiet, dying breath of democracy. Proletina later reconciled with her father, realizing how deep the manipulation had gone. She shared messages between Iliya and Lubena, revealing that access to the factories had been discussed and coordinated long before any official deal had even been signed. The plan had always been in motion. And now we need to talk about the pressure. That kind that doesn't just crush your business, it completely destroys your body. Iliya Zlatanov was arrested, held in custody for 4 months. He didn't just come out traumatized, he came out permanently disabled, one kidney removed, the other barely functioning. He's now dependent on dialysis to stay alive. And as if there weren't enough, he was arrested again. Proletina's husband, Mahmoud Bedir, was also arrested and then beat up in broad daylight. Just hours after his release, her brother, Yavor, no longer appears on camera. He lives in silence, his father Iliya still claims legal ownership of the factories, but the question of control? That's easy. Delta Guard still hold the keys. No police intervention, no court order, no justice. When asked whether the police presence outside the Eight Dwarfs was normal, even direct questions like, did Petro coordinate anything with the minister, were met with total blackout. Welcome to the Institutional Gaslighting Bulgarian edition. And just in case anyone was wondering who's paying salaries at the factory today, it's not Izamet. It's a company called BMD, Built New Day, owned by none other than Lubena Pavlova. Because why bother with fronts or fake names when nobody's even pretending to investigate? Let's hear from someone on the inside. Kamelia Churbajiyska, chief accountant at the Dupnitsa factory, gave a shocking testimony. She said that Spasov and lawyer named Kotseva showed up and told her she'd be fired and then rehired by Cristian the boxer. No, you're not hallucinating. When she refused to hand over the financial records, they didn't just threaten her job. They told her something far more chilling. If you don't give them, the company can't go bankrupt. Which means they weren't trying to run a company, they were preparing to legally authorize it. And they wanted her signature to pull the trigger. And where's Cristian Christoph now? Vanished, no phone calls, no office, but his Instagram still up and running, full of shirtless boxing tournament photos, sponsored by none other than Lubena's Pavlova's club. Meanwhile, enforcement agents, tax inspectors and labor authorities have all tried to gain entry into the factory. They've all been denied, no one gets in, no one touches anything, the place isn't just 45, it's armored like a mafia-grade private jet made out of legal paperwork. So here's the summary. This was never just a family conflict. This was a hostile takeover not by a competitor, but by the Bulgarian prosecution itself. With lawyers, notaries, mercenaries, gangsters, and bureaucrats all working in chores. And the payment method, no credit card or checks, but promissory notes, political favors, and stacks of gold bars. And all it took was one dinner at the Eight Dwarfs, suddenly people were arrested, factories changed hands, contracts were forged. Prosecutors played along, the chief prosecutor at the time, Satire, signed off on all of it. Cases were consolidated in a day, Borislav Sarafov got involved, and within one snap, like a magic trick, justice was solved, sealed, and buried. This was the golden trunk of Bulgarian corruption. This was once upon a time in Sofia. This part of the story isn't just about business or corruption, it's about a man whose body organs were bargaining chips in a mafia negotiation disguised as justice. Iliya Zlatanov says it all started in 2017. His father Iliya passed him the keys to the family empire, two elevator factories, one in Sofia, the other in Dupnica. For a moment, Yavor thought he was the new boss, that he had earned his place, that his father had let go. But months later, Iliya changed his mind, and he didn't just want back in, he wanted everything. So in a normal world, what do you do when you want to do a business transfer? You go to court. But in the Balkan underworld, when you want your company back, you don't file a lawsuit, you call Petru the Euro. By mid-2019, Yavor began to hear rumors, whispers really, that his father had gone to the Eight Dwarfs, that he made the deal with the Euro, that the price was 3 million leva, a promissory notes, and the complete dismantling of his own son. Yavor laughed it off, drunken gossip he thought, until July 17, 2019, when masked cops and bargaining dogs kicked down his door like it was narcos. They seized cash, his electronics, his child's laptop, even his gold coins. Because when Bulgarian prosecutors hit you, they loot like gamers in Skyrim. But this wasn't just warm-up. They dragged him to the bank, cleaned out his safety deposit box, then threw him into detention. No proper charges, no trial, nothing. Back home, his wife had just returned from the maternity ward, alone, with a newborn, while Yavor sat in jail wondering whether he'd see ever his baby again. And this is where the story crossed the line. This is no longer just extortion, it's a pure torture. Under constant pressure to transfer his company shares to Petru's people, Yavor's health started crumbling. Kidney stones, infections, pain that doubled him over. He was transferred to Sofia Med Hospital where doctors broke his stones under anesthesia. But somehow he ended up infected with a cocktail of bacteria. It wasn't just a sloppy treatment, it felt intentional. He developed full-blown sepsis, his fever soared, muscles withered, and at one point he couldn't even walk.
Бъбреците започнаха много да ме болят. Това ми е слабото място на мен. Започнаха да ме болят и един ден решиха да ме пратят на изследвания в най-близката болница, която е на 200 метра от ГМ-то. Това е София Мед. В София Мед решиха, че трябва да ме остават за лечение. Оставиха ме на лечение и започнаха през няколко дни да ми разбиват камъни с пълна опойка. Не знам случайно или не, изведнъж аз започнах да вдигам температура 39 градуса и да я поддържам денонощно. И се оказва, че аз съм направил сепсис. По-късно се разбира, че всъщност в болница София Мед, случайно или не, са ме заразили с няколко бактерии. Едната бактерия се казва клепсиела и тя буквално е започнала да ми яде бъбреците. Направила ми е сепсис и аз започнах реално да изчезвам физически. Започнах да се стопявам, както бях много натрениран и бях 95 кг в перфектна форма и започнах да спадам.
He literally begged for more care. One doctor looked him straight in the eye and said,
I was threatened with arrest if I didn't discharge him.
Защо Явор го изписвате с уросепсис? И той казва, мен ме заплашиха, че ще ме арестуват, ако не го изпиша веднага от болницата. Съжалявам, но аз съм си по-мил от него и мен ме изписаха от болницата. С 39 градуса температура и с уросепсис.
This wasn't just denial of care, it was a pure sabotage. From Sofia Med to the prison hospital to the Interior Ministry hospital, each stop ignored his worsening condition. One nurse, in a quiet act of rebellion, secretly called his wife to say,
They are about to discharge him with sepsis. Get here now.
Eventually, he was moved to Lozenets Hospital, where doctors ran actual tests. The results were horrific. His kidneys had swollen 5 times their normal size, plus had flooded his body. The choice was simple: lose a kidney or lose your life. He lost his left kidney, the remaining one was barely functioning at 20%. He dropped from 95 kilos of muscle to a frail body barely standing. But after a week of real treatment, his strength slowly began to return. And that's when the pressure returned too. Now we arrive at the deal. A final meeting, a final threat, and a final chance to surrender. That meeting took place inside a mysterious club on San Stefano Street, private security outside, phone confiscated, and sights at a woman straight out of a villain casting call. This is Slava Kotseva. As we already know, lawyer by title, mob boss by attitude. prostitute. She threatened him dozens of times. She threatened his family, his newborn, told him he'd die in prison if he didn't hand over his shares, that his baby would grow up fatherless, that he'd never breathe free air again.
Тази жена Десислава Коцева се държа като най-бруталната мутра, която някога съм срещал в живота си. Тя отправи над 50 заплахи срещу мене, срещу живота ми, срещу здравето ми. Много пъти ми каза, че бебето ми ще израсне без баща. Каза, че нейните началници ще ме вкарат отново в затвора и аз никога повече няма да излезна оттам. Тя ми каза, ти ще ни се подчиняваш, защото ние така ти казваме. И аз казах, кои сте вие? Кой е това? Пепи Еврото ли? Точно каза, аз не знам ти на кого казваш Пепи Еврото, но господин Петров е изключително влиятелна личност. И, това е най-интересното, и следващите 7 години, докато Иван Гешев е главен прокурор, вие ще правите точно каквото ви кажем. Защото ако не го правите, ти ще седиш в затвора, докато не изчезнеш. Това ми го казва Десислава Коцева. Десислава Коцева. Десислава Коцева. Десислава Коцева.
And then she dropped a line that could only be delivered by someone who thinks cruelty is poetic. Freedom, Sancho, is like salami. It's not for everyone. No joke. That's what she said.
Когато той попита какво ще се случи, ако не изпълни исканията, изразът беше свободата, Санчо е като салама, не е за всеки.
Yavor was given a deadline, March 10, but he didn't vote. He refused to sign. So what happened on March 16, the very first day of Bulgaria's COVID emergency measures? He was arrested again. And when he asked why...
we're still trying to figure it out. Could you give us a minute, please?
Because the prosecutor hadn't decided on the reason yet. So pretty much they arrested him and planned to invent the charges later. This is Bulgarian justice. You write threats in blood and the charges in pencil. Yavor begged to go to dialysis. They refused. Told him he'd need a special permission from the prosecutor just to stay alive. And when that didn't work, they moved to the next level, financial blackmail. When they couldn't kill him with sepsis, when they couldn't break him with jail, they used money. Pure ransom. Let's talk about the moment this became pure extortion. It was March 2020. Yavor was sick, deteriorating on the brick. He called his lawyer, Georgi Stefanov, to beg for help. What did Stefanov say? Pay to the euro once 350,000 euros in 1 or 2 hours, or you're staying in jail with or without dialysis. Yavor didn't have the money, but his wife scraped together 200,000 euros. She gave it to Stefanov. In the end, Yavor gave up everything, his shares, his property, another 150,000 euros. Stefanov claimed it all went to pay to the euro. But months later, someone slipped. Someone told Yavor that Mafia's own inventory listed only 150,000 stolen, not 350,000. And that's when it hit him. Even the lawyer had robbed him. From his safe, 38 kilograms of gold coins, 70,000 euros in cash. From his mother's safe, 550,000 euros, including the 350,000 of his own. And not a single coin of it was stored in the Bulgarian National Bank. Sources claim that the gold was chilling. No joke, the Secretary's Office of the Specialized Prosecution. Like it was someone's lunch. So Yavor sent a message not to a journalist, not to the police, but to the top. To Ivan Geshev, Bulgaria's chief prosecutor. Mr. Geshev, where's my money? Where are all the gold coins? Why are prosecutors allowed to steal from citizens like bandits with diplomas? And of course, the response? But this story isn't over yet, because behind this man, broken, sick, stripped of everything, stood someone else. His wife. Iliya Zlatanov's wife was left to fight a different kind of war, a quieter one, but no less terrifying. It didn't come with sirens or uniforms, it came with shadows that loitered outside her building, silent men who rotated in shifts every 12 hours. Faces she didn't even recognize, but eyes she could feel. It began just a few days after Yavor's arrest. A stranger walked past her car, leaned in and whispered that kind of sentence that buries itself in a parent's skull.
Watch your children. Regards from Iliya.
She filed a report with the police, the logical thing, the lawful thing, and as she expected, nothing happened. The watchers remained. She called 112, officers showed up, took statements. The men outside claimed that were simply waiting for someone. But she knew they weren't waiting, they were watching. At some point, fear twisted into something else. One night, she walked outside and confronted them calmly, directly. She told them, let's talk this out. They drove off without a word, but returned soon after, confirming everything she ever suspected. Later, a man claiming to be a mediator appeared and said he'd represent Iliya. He told her that the threats would stop, because even Iliya by now had realized the thing he'd unleashed. The legal mafia machine wasn't just targeting his enemies, it was devouring him too. When Yavor finally emerged from detention, he wasn't just broken businessman, he was disabled man, 93% disabled. His health had been ravaged, one kidney gone and the other one barely hanging. He could no longer walk without help. Every attempt to recover was blocked, every bank loan denied, every legal route jammed. His business shares were frozen, he had to sell his even own home just to pay for medication, and even when he tried to retrieve the goods stolen from his own factory, goods backed by court orders, accompanied by bailiff and 2 police officers, the state responded by sending 2 vans of specialized police, not to help him, but to warn him. They sent anti-terrorist forces to protect stolen factory parts. Later, he was invited to yet another meeting, this time at a club called Kohiba. Once again, phones were taken, back searched, he was through the same rituals of fear dressed as formality. Inside, waiting for him was the now familiar face of Desislava Kotseva. This time, she didn't know for advice, she issued ultimatums. If he died, she said his shares would be transferred to a business partner, a partner they already signed a deal with. In one of her texts, she repeated the same grotesque motto, freedom, Sancho, is not for everyone. But this story, what you're hearing right now, this one is. Because in today's Bulgaria, running a successful business means gambling with your life. Not against the market, not against competitors, but against a state-sponsored criminal structure that uses courts like crowbars and laws like blackmail. And that's why we're telling it, because if the institutions keep pretending this never happened, then someone has to say it. Out loud, clearly, without fear. But let's just look at our story from one more angle. In most countries, when your ex kidnaps your child, there's a system you can rely on. Police show up, court orders matter, lawyers fight for custody, not for their lives. But in Bulgaria, if your ex is a former magistrate with a deep roots in a judiciary swamp, the only thing you can rely on is your own silence. That's the world Lyubena Pavlova stepped into. Her ex-husband Petrov wasn't just a man with personal issues, he was a judicial power broker, a man plugged so deep into Bulgaria's institutional wiring you need a demolishing crew to cut him out. For over 9 months she had seen her son, court orders said she had the right, but Petr blocked her. She filed complaints, judges stalled, police shrugged. Lawyers refused to take her case, not because she was wrong, but because they were terrified. In a country where even a whisper against someone like Petr can cost your job, your peace or your kid, fear isn't an emotion, it's an institution. She tried to fight through the legal channels, but Petr didn't just play dirty. He went full psychological warfare. He began uploading private videos of her online, using shame as strategy, humiliation as a weapon. The goal wasn't just to keep the child, it was to break the mother she watched as her life became a public soap opera. Behind the scenes, when Lyubena began to uncover it, wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a well-oiled machine. A network of judges who delayed rulings until Petr said go. Prosecutors who turned their backs, lawyers who fled at the first mention of his name. Petr didn't need to break the law, he simply used it like a crowbar. When she became pregnant again, the threats escalated. Not just whispered words, but presence. Car outside her home, men on the street, surveillance masked as coincidence. Because corruption in Bulgaria doesn't care if you're a mother, it only cares if you're a threat. One day, another man passed by her building, same routine, same message, watch your children or something bad might happen. At some point, she stopped waiting for help, she started talking, not to the courts, but for anyone who would listen. She exposed the judges, named names, described how prosecutors refused to act, how she could physically see her son behind a locked gate but legally couldn't touch him. Her interviews becoming a chilling map of Bulgaria's institutional breakdown, not just of a law, but of a basic decency. She testified that the man abusing her wasn't a criminal by status, he was protector of the law, and that's what made it so dangerous. Let's pause here. Imagine this scenario. You're pregnant, your ex is a powerful man who's already used your child as a weapon, you have court order rulings, documents, all ignored. This isn't a Netflix series, this is Bulgaria 2023. And then came to the revelation that makes the story shift from horror to satire, because it turns out Petr wasn't just plugged into the judiciary, he was plugged into the neighborhood. Like, literally. Lyubena lived on the same street as Petr the Euro Petrov. Her neighbors, Boyko Borisov, Delian Peevski, President Rumen Radev. You couldn't script this title if you were making The Sopranos, Balkan edition.
Един от имотите на господин Петров е точно срещу къщата на господин Пеевски на Панорамен път.
Това е къщата, в която живеехме заедно преди да се разделим.
И господин Пеевски е така на диагонал почти от среща съсед.
Панорамен път първо е мръсна оживена улица. Не си махаме с съседите през улицата. Тук наблизо живее и, ще я кажа, премиера, живее и Бойко Борисов, живее и президента, живеят много хора наблизо. В смисъл...
Тоест това е единствено съвпадение, че,
да,
че сте живяли наблизо.
But as she continued speaking out, a clearer picture emerged. Whether she was a complicit or simply close enough to see the cracks, her testimony became a map. According to her, Petru ran a parallel justice system out of the restaurant. Prosecutors received monthly payouts, some to help sick parents, other for promotions. He gave out envelopes like they were state-funded bonuses. The Eight Dwarfs wasn't just a dining spot. It was where your cases got decided before you even saw a judge. Lubena claimed that Borislav Sarafov, the current general prosecutor of Bulgaria, was a close family friend, that he went house shopping with them. Then he personally served the financial and personal interest of Petru the Euro, that another magistrate, Emiliana Rusinova, frequently visited the restaurant and was part of the judicial dinner club. Even Delian Peevski, Bulgaria's infamous media oligarch and political shadow player, allegedly said,
Petru the Euro is a brilliant freak. Give him a bottle of whiskey, and he'll come up with compromising material on anyone.
This is not a joke, this is an intelligence report in disguise. So where does that leave Lubena Pavlova? Victim? Bystander? Silent partner? Maybe all three? But her testimony is now a part of history, a roadmap of a justice system that doesn't just bend under pressure, it signs contracts with it. A system where the law isn't blind, it just wears designer sunglasses and pretends not to see. And justice is served, but only to those who already have full plates. And just when everyone thought the Eight Dwarfs scandal had been packed away, shelved under too ugly to handle, a voice returned. The original voice, Iliya Zlatanov, the man who walked into a restaurant in 2019 with a business empire and walked out without a factory, without his goat, and nearly without a life. He stepped back into the light. But this time he wasn't just talking about elevators, he was talking about state capture. The rewind in 2019, Iliya had accused prosecutors, police officers, and businessmen of transforming Bulgaria into a Mafia-themed reality show. Except in this version, the Mafia didn't break the law, they were the law. Now, 4 years later, he sat down, but not to rehash, to name names, to point fingers, and to say most people in power prayed would stay forgotten. When politicians filled press conferences with empty promises and parliament collapsed under the weight of its own incompetence, a commission was quietly formed to investigate the Eight Dwarfs scandal. But as with the most things Bulgarian and dangerous, it failed before it all began. Because Iliya showed up, he was ready, but the system once again disappeared. The moment it smelled truth, witness vanished, testimonies ignored, politicians suddenly developed selective amnesia. Business as usual. But Iliya didn't hold back. He wasn't just talking about forged promissory notes or fake contracts anymore. He spoke of interrogations by foreign intelligence services. By hinted at drug trafficking, he named names tied to the Russian mafia. It wasn't just a web, it was a blueprint, and he laid it out for anyone still awake. The central villain hadn't changed. Petru Petrov the Euro still loomed over the narrative like a ghost that refused to be buried. Officially wanted by the Bulgarian state, unofficially a misery. No arrests, no interrogations, no court days, just rumors. Some said he was dead, others said he had been neutralized, there were whispers of a grave, but then in the most cyberpunk twist imaginable, team of Bulgarian IT enthusiasts from BG Elves tracked a connected Garmin smartwatch, allegedly his, broadcasting real-time health data, not from exile, from Bulgaria, from home. Meanwhile, the bodies had started showing up. Martin Bojanov, a notary tied directly to the Eight Dwarfs circle, was shot dead in front of his garage door while his family were still home. A reminder that fairy tales might end with weddings, but Bulgarian scandals held with funerals. Former Minister of the Interior Boyko Rashkov, now a political outsider, went public with a kind of statement that would trigger criminal investigations in any other EU state. He didn't mince words, he said what everyone whispered, that the prosecutor's office didn't just ignore the evidence, it covered it up. Petru Petrov had built an internal ecosystem of paid judges, prosecutors, and police officers. The justice in Bulgaria wasn't broken, it had been sawed off in monthly installments. He even dropped a new location, the SS Club, a luxury den allegedly used by Petru to run meetings, stash compromise, and plan his next moves. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a whole infrastructure. Every attempt to examine the judicial cartel, blocked, buried, forgotten, just like the files in Sofia darkest basements. But finally the Bulgarian court ruled on what Iliya Zlatanov had been screaming since the beginning. The forced seizure of his company was illegal. Everything, the forged contracts, the shady promissory notes, the armed hospitals deals, was null and void. A victory? Maybe on paper, but on the ground the country acted like nothing had happened. Delta guards still blocked factory entrances, police still refused to intervene, and Petru the Euro still gone either underground, under protection, or under the state's invisible wing. Today Iliya Zlatanov runs successful ventures in Italy and Ukraine because somehow in the middle of a literal war zone it's easier to do business than under Bulgaria's prosecutor or mafia. That's a bitter poetry to do it. Bulgaria stole his factory, Europe may return his justice, he's filed a case in Strasbourg, not just for compensation but for validation, to prove what happened wasn't a dispute or a misunderstanding, but a textbook case for a state capture committed endorsed, and institutionalized by people in robes and power suits. As of this recording, the Strasbourg case is still pending, but if the court rules in his favor, Bulgaria will be forced to compensate him for the stolen gold and destroyed company and the years of psychological and economic torture he endured. The money doesn't fix a country, it doesn't rebuild trust, it doesn't erase 4 years of exile, it doesn't bring back a name after it's been dragged through the dirt and rolled up in fake invoices. Because what Iliya keeps repeating whenever someone calls him an optimist is this: Bulgaria's judiciary isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed, to protect the corrupt, to harass the honest, to turn prosecutors into predators, and yet he's still here. He says the protests don't work, that the people don't care, that the football scores get more attention than disappearing businessmen. But maybe, just maybe, justice as a memory still matters. He spent hundreds of thousands in illegal fees and his life was nearly erased, but he's still standing, not for revenge, for legacy, for the next generation of Bulgarians who might want to start a business without having to buy Mafia insurance. He doesn't trust institutions anymore, but he believes in mentorship. He helps where he can, quietly, strategically, offering advice to those still inside the system jaws, trying to get out before it chews through them. And today he walks as living proof that in Bulgaria justice doesn't come like a storm, it comes limping. 5 years late, half-blind and covered in the fingerprints of the very people who were supposed to deliver it. And yet he's still alive and talking. And that in itself is a revolutionary. Iliya Zlatanov's story isn't just the personal tragedy of a son betrayed, it's a user manual, a procedural guide for how to legally destroy a person in Bulgaria without leaving a fingerprint. It starts with a forged document, then comes a quiet arrest, denied medical care, intimidation by lawyers, and finally a transfer of everything you've ever owned, signed under pressure, sealed in silence. It cost Yavor his company, his health, his home, his dignity, over 13 million leva wiped out through a mix of state silence and mafia choreography. It took 5 years, 5 long, humiliating, physically devastating years just to have the forced transfer for his company declared invalid. The system that arrested him without charges, tortured him with the medical negligence, and stole his gold in broad daylight still hasn't said a word. And yet even now, even after the legal victory, he hasn't gotten his factory back, Delta Guard still controls it, the police still refuse to enter, the documents said one thing, but the boots on the ground say another. Today Yavor is still fighting, but not just in Bulgaria. His legal team's working across borders, building cases, submitting evidence, knocking on doors of international institutions that still remember what words like justice and dignity used to mean before they became jokes on Bulgarian TV panels. Because inside a country whose words have been erased or worse, weaponized, Yavor's not asking for revenge. He's not waving flags or calling for riots, but he wants his closure, the kind of closure that says, you tried to bury me, but I'm still breathing. And now I'm speaking, and not just for me, but for everyone who tried to erase. His body may never recover, his business may never return, but his resolve remains untouched. That's what terrifies them the most, because a man who's already lost everything has nothing left to fear. He walks into courtrooms now not as a victim, but as a mirror, and every judge that dares to look too long sees the truth. But justice in Bulgaria isn't that, it's franchised. This is why Yavor keeps fighting, not because he thinks he'll get everything back, but because if he stays quiet, the machine will keep rolling, and the next victim might not be so lucky. The next Yavor might not survive the sepsis, might not survive the threats, might sign everything before the story is even told. That's what this whole scandal is, not just a corruption case, it's a diagnostic report, a warning label, a crash course in how a country can look democratic on paper and still function like a mafia state with tax reforms. But it ends not with closure, but with a truth that echoes long after the last envelope is handed out. The Eight Dwarfs was never just a scandal, it was a national diagnosis, a slow clinical dissection of how a justice system can rot from the inside while keeping its ties straight and its paperwork in order. It showed us how a factory can be stolen without a crowbar, how a man can be tortured without bruises, and how a country can commit crimes through silence and call it law. It wasn't about bad apples, it was about the orchard. Prosecutors who prosecuted on command, police who protected the predators, judges who rubber-stamped extortion schemes while wearing robes that still smelled of tradition. It was a machine, precise, cold, designed not to serve the people, but to eat them alive and file a report after. A father was broken, a son left crippled, a mother erased from her child's life, and the state, it did nothing. It watched, and when it spoke in shrugs. No resignations, no consequences, no shame. Today the files are closed, the case is stalled, the restaurant door locked, because Bulgaria doesn't bury its scandals, it recycles them. And the truth no one dares to say in front of camera is that in this country you don't just survive corruption, you inherit it. The Eight Dwarfs never disappeared, they just changed names, moved addresses, and opened new restaurants. Until someone, really someone, shuts the whole machine down, this story isn't over.